Hi everyone, this is Rob Darrow from iNACOL. We're glad you're here to join us for our important webinar today entitled Approaches to Evaluating Blended Learning Programs. We've got three outstanding presenters who have done a lot of work in this area regarding blended learning and evaluation. Mary Esselman from EAA in Michigan, Ernie Silva from SIATech, and Liz Hessam as well. And they'll introduce themselves in a little bit. But before we get to them, I just want to do a little bit of quick background housekeeping stuff so we're all on the same page here. Know that our webinar format in general, there'll be an overview by all of our presenters here in just a few minutes with introductions and their presentation. Feel free as they're going along to type any questions in the chat window in the bottom left-hand corner, and I'll be happy to field those and share those back. It's often difficult to present and see the questions at the same time, so Mary, Ernie, and Liz, just know that I'll be watching the chat room. You're certainly welcome to as well. And then just a little quick background about blended learning so that we're all on the same page as far as that. So the definition we all use as far as blended learning is the Horn and Staker definition from 2013, that it's a formal education program in which a student learns at least in part through online delivery of content and instruction with some element of student control over time, place, path, and or pace. And some of that's in a brick and mortar location and some of that's at home. And we continue, it's important I think for all of us to know that we continue to refine this definition all together as a group, and that we keep getting better at it more and more as we have webinars like this where we talk about some of these specific things like how to evaluate them. So it's important to also realize that when we talk about blended learning, although it's nice to have a digital whiteboard or computers on every student's desk, that does not equate necessarily to blended learning. And I think you'll hear that through the presentation today. But it's okay to have a tech-rich or a tech-enabled classroom, but being a blended learning classroom is a little bit different. When we talk about teaching and learning, we're talking about three different parts of it, right? We're talking about what the student is doing and where the student is, what the teacher is doing, and where the teacher is, and then finally what and where the content is. All three of those things are important, whether you're doing face-to-face teaching or online teaching or blended teaching. All of those things are still the same in the various places. As I mentioned earlier, and again just to reiterate, our focus today is really hopefully to answer some of these questions for you that include what ongoing measures are used to measure program effectiveness in a blended learning program, what tools are used by teachers, and then what tools and processes are used by administrators and leadership and to determine student and program success. As I mentioned, our presenters are mentioned there, and I'm sorry I left Elizabeth Hessam off that as well, but we're happy to have you all here. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Ernie and Liz so that you can introduce yourselves and then talk a little bit about your school and go from there.
Well, great. Thank you so much. This is Ernie Silva with SIATech. We are the School for Integrated Academics and Technologies. We are a dropout recovery high school. So we're a charter. We have a specific mission working with a specific student profile, and we do both a classroom-based and a blended learning model. And Liz is going to talk to you about great detail. Liz is not only a former teacher and a principal, but she also is the education director for our school, and she is the brain trust behind our blended learning model, and she's going to be talking about that. I'm going to quickly run through what we're doing and why we've adopted the multiple measures that we have, and how we utilize them and to serve the unique population that we have. So our education model, the slide that's up now, shows you that we partner with predominantly with federal agencies like Job Corps and WIA one-stop centers, so that students are not only learning academics and re-engaging in a high school setting, but they're also developing job skills that they're going to be able to use in living wage jobs. They're developing, finding mentors, and as you see through the pictures, we're really focused at building relationships. For the dropout recovery population. Our students are just under 90% Latino and African American. They are 100% very low income. About 40% of our students will be the first in their families to graduate from a high school. So they have a really different, it's a different demographic than a traditional high school serves. And so we are faced with trying to figure out what is a meaningful measures. What is it that we can show? Because our students again are significantly below grade level. Of the slide I'm getting in front of you now, we have since 1998 over 13,000 public school diploma earners that we have worked with in our 5 states. We're in Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, New Mexico, and California. And we're serving about 3,000 students at a given time across the country. You see here that the students are a little bit older. Our average age when they come back in is about 19. The big issue is in serving our students is that when they re-enter high school, their learning level, their grade level, is significantly below the high school level. So you see in math, it's a little bit over 6th grade, and in reading, it's at or below 7th grade level. So the magic is, what do we do with these students, and what do we, how do we serve them, and how do we demonstrate that we're doing something that's meaningful? You're familiar with state tests that have a tendency to lock onto a given grade level and assess only that. We've developed multiple measures, including an individual student growth model that Liz is going to talk to you about, as well as we use the Gallup measure of hope, engagement, and well-being to demonstrate that our students, even though they come from an academically troubled past, that they are doing as well or better than the average students across the country. So I think that's going to be my my introduction of SIATech, and Liz is going to be joining me after the next presenter. Okay, so I'm handing it back.
Okay, great. I'll just transition right in. This is Mary Esselman. I'm the Deputy Chancellor with the Education Achievement Authority of Michigan, and we are a state turnaround district or recovery district. We work with the bottom 5% of persistently failing schools. Currently, we have 15 schools, all of which are located in Detroit, and moving forward, there are about 147 schools on the list. We'll begin to work in outstate Michigan. We have 15 schools. Of those, 9 are K-8 schools and 6 are high schools. We serve just over 8,000 students, of which 100% are at risk. So what I want to do is just give you an overview of our implementation model. We actually implement a blended model across all of our schools. I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looked like last year in year 1, what it looks like moving forward as we've entered kind of midway through year 2, and what we're looking for in terms of implementation and evaluation in our 3rd year. Our mission I've kind of posted there for you to see, and we're very purposeful in trying to disrupt the traditional education system because we know that's a system that has not worked for our students and for many students in terms of how education has been delivered. So what you see in our schools is not similar to that in many respects. So looking at year 1, really our schools rally around 5 pillars, and those pillars really provide the substance of what we do. The first being we group students by readiness, not by age or grade. So we actually give an assessment in the fall. We use Performance Series by Scantron, and we use the data from that to not find time in the day to work on gaps, so we actually put kids right where the gaps are and accelerate them back to and beyond grade level. We also are very focused on students having choice and the ability to own their learning by having a personalized learning pathway in which we expect them to be able to communicate their progress. We also allow students to work at their own pace, and again, as I mentioned before, use that blended delivery system to ensure that they are able to master rigorous standards. Students have to actually provide 3 pieces of evidence to show mastery, and that's a combination of performance tasks and common assessments. And then finally, we expect to see real-time feedback to all stakeholder groups, including students themselves, as well as parents and teachers and other leaders. So that was what year 1 looked like. It was a big paradigm shift, not just for our teachers, but also for our students. So now looking at year 2, what changed for us? We found that it was really important for our professional development to model a blended personalized delivery system, and so we actually built a blended course that our teachers went through, so we weren't having to teach the technology pieces. Rather, all of that became a part of being a student, and they were modeling all of the things that we expected from their students. We also started to move away from just understanding what it meant to be in a personalized blended system to how can we now use what technology gives us to look at time, space, talent, and resources differently. So in a lot of our schools, I've listed some of the programs that you can see. We have the PACE program, a student-centered village, open math labs, and learning pods, which really allow time and space to be used differently. They're much larger spaces. Students work without bells. They are able to work on different subjects and choose how they build their schedules. And then also we're seeing that not being tethered has really given flexibilities on looking at how students pace themselves and stay on track and ahead of track in their subject areas. Looking at next year, what we're seeing in our planning is we're starting to look at how do we now use staffing differently and really make use of different adult roles. We allocate all of our schools a budget from which they can determine how they staff. So we're really looking at different opportunities for full-time teachers, part-time teachers, tutors, paras, all kinds of different adults, college students who can support the learning process, not necessarily the typical 1 teacher to 25 students or 1 teacher to 30 students. We're also looking at a distributed leadership model in our new design high school for next year. And then we've identified 12 next generation ready competencies that we feel all students should master as opposed to just being college and career ready, with college and career ready being one of them, but tech savvy, globally competent, environmentally cognizant being some of the other things that we think all students should be able to show competency not only in behaviors, but in terms of performance tasks and then externships they have opportunities to participate in. So that's kind of how the system works, and that's an example just kind of that progression. So that gives you an idea of how we implement our blended model, and I'll turn it back now.
Okay, I've got 2 last slides, and then I'm gonna hand it over to Liz. So the challenge in dealing with the dropout population, students that are far below grade level that didn't fit into a regular high school, is that the assessments that states traditionally use are standardized, single grade, and it makes it very difficult for us to be able to demonstrate how students are accomplishing. It makes it really difficult to show growth, and we're all, just like Mary's schools, we're really focused on individual student growth. The kid who comes into us reading at the 6th grade level needs to be able, fully functioning in order to pass the exit exam, to graduate from high school, and to move on to be career ready, to be college ready, has to make a significant amount of growth in the classroom. And so we struggled with how do we demonstrate what we're doing. We have found that there are a lot of folks across the country that are struggling with the same things. Liz is going to talk to you in detail about the measurements that we've developed and that we're using. What I'm going to do is put in a raw plug for an event in next November where we're bringing together schools that are serving these same students. So there's a website that's full of information about what you can do to reach out and to serve students that are far below grade level. And we're hoping that you'll join with us in advocating for the importance of alternative assessments with the population that we're, particularly those of you who are serving underserved, underperforming students. Liz, I think it's your turn to jump in and to talk about the actual measurements that we're using and how they inform student success. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ernie. As you can see, basically we were looking for what Ernie was describing, a way to show that our students are making growth with us in a more real-time setting. So we're currently using the STAR reading and STAR math assessments to do that, and the reason that those work for us is because they are adaptive. We can administer them throughout the year. They're not very long. They do correlate to state standards. They give us a pretty reliable level of where the student is, and we're able to measure and report the growth and achievement of the students and use that information when we're talking to students individually. So, some of the challenges that Ernie mentioned earlier, our state assessments are once a year. In the spring, our population is very transient. We have students who enter and exit our program on a weekly basis, so a one-time test really does not work for us. We needed a way for us to show that students are making growth throughout their time with us. So all of our students take a baseline test when they come in, and then there are benchmarks when they take additional tests, and our teachers and our staff at the sites have a lot of leeway on when they can test in order to best capture the individual growth of each student. So of course, this learning growth model allows us to show that students are making progress while they are with us, and it's not just a snapshot. So the benefits, it actually holds us accountable for things that we have control over. I think a lot of times when we talk about different accountability measures, the perception is that we don't want to be accountable, and it's really just the opposite. We want to be accountable in ways that really show what our students are doing and how they're growing. It measures, measuring the learning really helps the students hope and engagement because they can see their individual progress, and we don't set unrealistic targets. This is one of the things we hear over and over again from students, that the reason that they weren't successful in a traditional setting is because they fell so far behind that they felt hopeless and they could never catch up. So when they see that they're starting wherever it is that they are, where they come in, and that they're making growth towards their goal, it really helps them to feel hopeful that they can complete, and that ties into their self-esteem and really helps them stay on track. And then of course we set high expectations for every student, so they have to increase their learning every year. So again, it's not that we're lowering expectations, we're actually raising the bar. So what do we do with these results? Well, every student in our schools has an individualized learning plan. So for those of you that work with special ed students, I think everybody always thinks, well, why don't all students have an IEP? Because really every student learns differently. And it allows students to take ownership of their learning. So they know what their test scores are, they know what their target is, and they can see themselves reaching that target. We often have students who will come to a teacher and say, I want to take another assessment because I feel like I'm ready, I know I'm going to go up. And then when they do, they get that validation of seeing their own growth. We are very, very heavily focused on student individual goal setting, so our teachers meet weekly with the students to set goals. It includes their assessments and looking at scores and looking at where they are in the curriculum and constantly showing how they're meeting benchmarks to get to that goal of graduation. It gives us the ability to track our student growth and make decisions based on what we see. And then, of course, we're also evaluating their course completion and their academic growth. And basically what we do with that information is we tie it to our site development, professional development plans and our teachers' plans. And so we look to see where our students are struggling and then how we need to adjust our program to best meet their needs. It ties into, again, everything from our professional development plan down to the individual staff goal setting, planning, training to make sure that we're targeting those areas. So when we looked at our 2011-12 results, we saw that one of the areas we need to focus on is literacy. And so we implemented monthly content teacher meetings, and they focus on best practices and different areas that they need to improve in. And basically what we do is those teachers take what they learn in that conversation, try it out, and then bring the results back to the group. So there's a constant cycle of looking at what we're doing and assessing. We look at our data on a monthly basis and how students are doing, and we're currently looking for a new reading program that we can use that will help us to target our really low readers and how we can get them to the next level. And then the final piece of information that we use to assess our students is the Gallup poll, and Ernie talked about this a little bit earlier. So once a year we do this, and it measures some of the different things that are, not the academic so much, but hope. And so you can see here basically what this drives, and it's a really good college GPA predictor, and it helps the students on what they're going on to the next level. And what we see with our students, and remember we're 100% high school dropout recovery program, is that typically, well, from year to year we have seen that our averages are higher than the national average. And we were actually recognized as a school of hope nationally. So our students, when they're answering these questions, really give information about how they feel in our school and that leads to their success. Engagement is their enthusiasm for school. Again, our students do a really good job here. We're typically above the national average. And then their well-being. And again, we see that as above the average. So this helps us with our conversations. It's not just the learning gains, although those are, of course, really important. But we know that our teachers are doing a great job in providing a safe and nurturing environment for our students because we're getting this information back, and it helps us when we're talking to stakeholders and things to show them that, our school really is making a difference. It's more than just the academic. And I will turn it back over to Mary.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about our actual system. When I think of, as we look at our evaluation system, there's kind of 4 key areas that we look at. First, we look at fidelity of implementation, and that's really important, especially last year in year 1 and as we transition to year 2. Secondly, we really look at, are we providing the kinds of support that we need to help make that paradigm shift for students, for their parents, for stakeholders in the community, as well as our teachers and staff. That also was very critical in our first phase. 3 and 4 kind of deal a lot with second year, third year, where we're starting to look at what are some of the outcomes or changes we're seeing not only in teacher practice, but in student performance outcomes, and then kind of well-being, which Liz talked a little bit about. And then 4, which is what we'll really start focusing heavily on this year moving forward, is to what degree are we able to really scale the program, and looking at things such as sustainability, depth, kind of the shift in practice, and then evolution. Our schools starting to really personalize it and make it their own. So let's dig a little bit deeper. So we have a 4-pronged assessment system. First, we look at individual growth, very similar to what you saw. We give the performance series 4 times a year. We expect 1.5 or more years growth. Last year, we actually, across all 12 of our direct run schools, the majority of students did have 2 or more years growth in both reading and math. We also look at those pieces of evidence that are rubric scored, those performance tasks, to really get at deeper learning as students progress and master each of the learning targets. The evidence ties to a learning piece where kids are reflecting back on that initial knowledge they're gaining, practice where they show some initial understanding, and then an application piece of evidence where there's real-world connections. We look at achievement, not so much, similar to what you heard. If our students are 4, 5, and 6 years below grade level, for those students, a state assessment, whether or not they're proficient, really isn't going to provide a lot of high-yield data. And then we're doing graduation by defense. Currently this year we'll have both our 10th graders and our 12th graders will do a defense of their education over the course of the year. In terms of how we go about providing data, when you really think of how do you, in a blended system, make sure that there's real-time access so you can ensure that all students are moving, we realized that we needed a platform that would allow us to really provide a rich collection of resources that were kind of agnostic to teacher-created, provider, and open source. We wanted the ability to map it back to standards, whether they were state standards, national standards, or international standards. We even are able to use it for our IEPs for students. We wanted that real-time access to data and then the ability to communicate and collaborate across systems. So all of these attributes we felt were really important in terms of being more efficient, making sure teachers aren't bogged down with the kinds of tasks that technology can assist with, as well as more effective in terms of, as kids move at their own pace, making sure we're staying ahead of them so we're not artificially holding kids back because we don't have the content. So in terms of that access to information, there's kind of 5 key areas that there's regular real-time access to data in terms of time spent on activities and the topics they're spending them on, in terms of student pace and progress, who's on pace, who's ahead of pace, who's behind pace. We have a badging system that allows us to badge in terms of not just academics, but service, who's helping who. We have a strong peer network component, as well as leadership and personal milestones. The student profile is a piece that we're adding this year, which really gives access to those specific things that may relate to certain students, but not all students, in the areas of IEPs, behavioral plans, or other kinds of data, for example, ACT, Planner, Explorer, that aren't inherent to the system. And then obviously mastery data, which shows where students are in terms of things that they've mastered, things that are in progress, and things they have yet to attempt. But being able to look at that not only at the individual standards level, but then looking at them at a unit level and a course level as well. We also have a digital portfolio that students put their exemplars of practice in and evidence, and then obviously use that towards their defense at the end of the year. Here's an example of what it looks like. So this is the student experience. This is the real-time data students have access to. This is the login page where you can see, students can see where they are in terms of mastery of a particular unit on the main screen, and on the left-hand side, where they are in terms of mastering of individual targets. On the lower right, you see the badging. In the middle, you see the productivity meter, which is really looking at pace versus progress. And then on the left-hand side, there's a communication wall where not only can students communicate, but also they're able to kind of ping one another for help as students become experts and master different standards. Here's their progress page, which not only shows where they are in a particular course, it's where their badges are housed. It's also where they can update their daily self-assessment, as well as their portfolio, and they can see where they are in terms of their vertical progression within each subject area. Sorry, I misspoke there. A daily self-assessment in terms of understanding interest and effort is here. This is how their learning paths work. Whenever you see a plus sign, it shows when a student actually has choice. We're strong believers in children should be able to choose how they learn a subject and how they show their understanding as they develop evidence. Moving on, taking a quick look at the teacher side, rather than just a paper pencil grade book, we use more of a radar report that gives teachers a sense of who's moving and who's not moving. The color shows their daily self-assessment, so teachers can filter on who's lost or who's slacking or who is bored. for example, or who sees themselves as an expert and can help in a service capacity with other students. One of the powerful pieces is you can drill down. So if you click on the student, you can actually see their entire learning pathway, their productivity meter, what's happening on their communication wall. So you can really dig deep into what's happening with that student, and you can do it real time. Moving to the next, this is a class view, so it's the same kind of data, but you can see it for the whole class. The green shows you who's getting ready to move out of a unit. The little circles represent where kids are in terms of their mastery cycle. It shows their self-assessment. It also has a selector button you can see on that red circle on the right, where teachers can actually default to the whole class or select an individual or a group of students, where as they look at that mastery data, they can real-time intervene through setting up a group, sending a communication, or even assigning a resource that they feel will help a student who needs to accelerate or one who's struggling. The next view is just the standards report, which shows where students are in terms of mastering the various objectives in the course. And then obviously here's the grading page as students drop box different pieces. The teachers can score it using their rubric and make comments to the student as well as to themselves as they're tracking students. We also believe strongly in teachers tracking their own progress. And so we have an entire part of the teacher side of the platform that has teachers' ability to track where they are in their evaluation. We expect them to film themselves at least twice a year and share that practice with their peers and PLCs. They can post their recordings there. They also build in their own portfolio of evidence of their practice. So in terms of lessons learned, that's kind of where we are this year. We're continuing to evolve. We're doing some different things with our technology to support teachers and students this year. These are some of the other pieces of data that we collect as part of the evaluation. Next year we will begin end of course for non-traditional tested subjects of English and mathematics. We have an assessment for grit. We use a value-added growth model for pay for performance. In terms of instructional practice, we actually have a scaffolded walkthrough because we don't expect all teachers to make that paradigm shift at the same time. So the way that walkthrough works is, what do we expect to see in terms of classroom setup and visual cues before school starts? What do we expect to see in terms of structures once school is ongoing for the first month? And then once we're at full implementation, we look at rituals and routines that set up that learning environment, and then what's happening in terms of student ownership and engagement. So our walkthroughs actually capture that. We use an electronic system so teachers get real-time feedback, and it creates kind of a library of their walkthroughs and their progress. And then we obviously use focus groups and surveys at different points to collapse with the outcome data I talked about in terms of assessments and the portfolios, along with the observations that we're seeing. So it gives us a really robust set of data that we can use in not only evaluating the program in terms of implementation and kind of changes that we need to make, but also are we getting the actual outcomes that we need to see in order to make sure that students are accelerating back to grade level.
Mary, before we turn that over, several people asked the question about the course management system you use. So maybe if you could take a minute to describe what it is, which system you're using, and what you had to go through to get it to the point where it is now, probably would be helpful.
Oh, okay, sure. We formed a partnership when we developed the teaching and learning platform with Agilix and School Improvement Network. So the underlying architecture is Brain Honey, but it's actually been reworked in order to support a blended environment so that it can actually support not only totally virtual students, but blended students as well as students in its traditional classroom by adding interfaces that are student-based as well as teacher-based. And then School Improvement Network partnered with us to provide the types of professional development supports that are needed for parents, students, and families in order to really help accelerate the change process in terms of making those paradigm shifts.
Thanks, Mary. And back to Ernie and Liz.
Liz, you want to go ahead and walk through? I'll duck back out.
Sure. Thanks, Ernie. So basically what we have learned, the learning growth model is imperative for our evaluation and monitoring of re-engaged students, not just to tell our story to others, but also for the students in order to feel empowered in their academic growth. That the graduation rate calculations have to be appropriate in terms of cohort. We didn't really talk about this, but this is another, some of those slides that Ernie showed with the invisible graduates. They really exist. We have a lot of graduates from our program that are not calculated in our graduation rate, and so that is a problem that we're addressing and trying to change the model. We have to have strong advocacy work at the local, state, and federal level in order to make that a priority. And basically, if we're going to have competency-based education, we need engaging, specialized, and customized curriculum to truly accelerate learning, and that's similar to what we just saw. And then the staff development and training is crucial to success with the dropout population, or really any population, making sure that your staff are on board, that they have the training that they need to implement all of these things. You know, when you're working with mastery or competency-based and you're working in a blended environment, and there are so many different tools and different things that teachers need to be trained on, that constant staff development loop is absolutely crucial. And then you have to have the data system in order to show success, and in order for the teachers and the students and your stakeholders to be able to have access to that information and use it. So those are the main things that we have learned. And I just saw a question, who provides the staff training? Actually, we have a whole arm of our organization that is dedicated to professional development. Ernie shared earlier our nonprofit, the Reaching at Promise Students Association, and that's part of it, but then we actually have a whole team of people that helps to develop our professional development and coordinate it. And then sometimes we use outside vendors too, depending on what the training is, but we do a lot of it in-house.
So there probably are other questions that people will type in here, but I was hoping that maybe Ernie and Liz, you guys could start to talk about how many years ago you started the process and what some of the challenges were in those early days, and what you've learned through being persevering in this direction. And then Mary, if you could follow up with where you are in the process as well. And just to let everybody else know, since I'm talking right now, is following after this presentation, the link to the presentation as well as the recording will be emailed out to all of you as well. So anyway, so Liz or Ernie, what if you kind of give us a timeline where you're at, and then Mary, you do the same. And then we'll take other questions from there.
Liz, if you could go ahead and take that. Liz has had longer experience, but she's much younger, but she's had longer experience with the organization and really came up kind of through the ranks. So she's seen from both the classroom side, the blended learning side, and different roles within the organization. So Liz, if I'm not putting you on the spot, it would be great to have you kind of talk about challenges and growth for SIATech.
No, that's fine, and thank you, Ernie, for making that clarification on my age. Well, you know, we are in California. That's our main, where we're mainly based. We do have schools in other states as well, but from the California perspective, 15 years ago, it really was the Wild West, and we really did whatever we wanted, and there wasn't very much accountability. I mean, we followed our charter, but it was very open to what you wanted to do. And I think the important thing about our organization is we established our vision really early on that we were a high school dropout recovery, and that we were going to do whatever it took to reach those students and make them successful. And that has driven us throughout all the years that we've been in business. And throughout the years, we've seen more and more and more restrictions be put on charter schools in California. We've had to learn all of the rules on blended learning and using the online components. And here in California, if you're going to collect attendance on students that aren't sitting in a classroom, then you have a whole other set of laws that you have to follow. So we've had to work within that framework and continue to follow our mission as the laws became more and more restrictive, and that's where Ernie comes in, and he can, of course, speak to this, where we're constantly having to watch what's going on politically to know what new challenges are on the horizon for how we can continue to serve this population and continue to show how we're making progress. So the nice thing is, because we started in this kind of really open playground of us being able to do things differently, it allowed us to go outside of the norm and really serve students in a different way. And a lot of that has been through a blended learning model that we've continued with. And I have to say, too, that I think one of the perceptions of the students that we serve is that, blended and online learning will not work for them because they, are not successful in school and they have to be sitting in a classroom all day if anyone's going to help them. And what we have found is that it's really the opposite, especially in our programs that are more online, where we have students out in the community and they work and they have families and they have children and they have so many barriers that, sitting in school for 6 to 8 hours a day really does not fit into their life. And we have seen that we're able to reach those students and provide them with the support that they need to be successful in a blended environment. So, and really we started doing that in 2009. So that was a natural outgrowth from our classroom-based programs that we started, and we've been, very successful with that.
Great, well, I'll jump in. I've been actually working in personalized learning and blended learning over the last 4 years. I spent a couple of years in Kansas City, and then obviously I've been here for the last 2 years. And I think as I look at that journey, one of the biggest challenges was, how do you develop a professional development system that really helps not only teachers make the paradigm shift, but parents as well as students and staff. And we spent a lot of time over the last couple of years really working through that, and we developed 5 modules that we felt were really critical in terms of really shifting to a strong blended program. The first module being mindset, mission, vision. One of the first things we do, not only in the interview process but also with staff, is really dissect those 5 pillars. We start to look at, what is it that you would have to change about your own practice to really meet each of these pillars, and then also what would be the barriers you would face in doing so. So we try to put all of those things right on the table as we start to look at mindset and kind of the mission and the vision. And then we really spend a lot of time on learning environment. About 2/3 of our professional development is in that area, really looking at building relationships, providing a shared vision that comes through student voice, creating a common language. Kids and teachers aren't used to talking about learning targets, rubrics, evidence, pace, mastery. All of those things need to be encompassed into this new language. Looking at what are the structures. Are we going to allow a flexible structure in which kids work through independently, or is it more of a rotational model? So we work through those, and then what are the actual rituals and routines that need to support the process? What do I do if the teacher's busy? If the teacher's leading a small group, we have teachers that spend probably 85% of their time doing literature circles or small group. How does the classroom walk in and you can't find the teacher because it seems like it's just working by itself? And those don't just automatically. Then we do a segment on planning for instruction. It's no longer about daily lesson planning. It's suddenly about unit planning with multiple points of entry and exit. And then how do you assess for mastery? What is mastery? And then the last one, how do you use that real-time data you're getting to intervene and really drive performance? How do I use who's moving quickly, who's not moving, who's bored. How do I take all of that data and make decisions about who I'm going to focus on in different groupings and different support structures each day? So that was probably one of the big kind of takeaways and challenges. I think we've made a lot of progress there. Also the technology tools. In Kansas City, we did it with no technology, and so really figuring out what do teachers need and what do students need. And we knew we couldn't develop it, so having that partnership was really critical, because we kind of provide the boots on the ground and then really are able to work closely with our partners. And then the library of resources. I spent the last 3 years really negotiating with publishers to release their content in an agnostic way, so it's at not only the object level but at the course level, so we can use it to deliver for any type of instructional setting. So those are some of the challenges. We're starting to see some of the fruits of that labor as we see more and more publishers willing to release their content in multiple formats. We're excited about some of the open source libraries, and then some of the teacher development work that our teachers are doing is amazing in terms of units. Where we're going next is really, again, looking at how we use talent differently, and also a much stronger interdisciplinary focus in terms of how do we create that same kind of mastery cycle, but allow for that to happen in that more open interdisciplinary way. So that's kind of just to sum up some of the challenges and kind of some of where we've come and where we're going.
There was a question about how do you know that your professional development is working, and I'll share this with Liz, but one of the things, because we, as we've explained, do both in-house and broader through RAPSA, we find one way that we're measuring is that we are increasing the number of people that are attending the workshops and the outreach that we do to provide professional development to other folks doing a competency-based system and working with at-risk students across the country. So we see an increase in the number of individuals, number of educators, as well as from the number of states that they come from. And I'll leave it to Liz if she wants to get into a bit more detail. But the other thing we do, and I think the slides kind of quickly indicated, is that we're really using the outcomes from our growth model to allow us to, in the professional development context, to be able to compare who's doing what and how well they're doing based on how student performance at one site, the student performance is up in a given curriculum area, and we kind of use the success of individuals to spur on others so that they understand better what's working, how it's being implemented, so that we're upping the game for everybody, and we tie again that growth model and that data back into professional development that way to help folks at all of our sites and at all of our job categories. Liz, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I will just say that in response to evaluation of our professional development, we also follow the professional development goals for the sites are tied to our strategic priorities, and then each site is empowered to choose their own professional development focus for the year based on the data that they're seeing at their sites and what they feel they need to focus on. And then every in-house, the training that they go through, the professional development, is evaluated through surveys and things. And then actually as a whole at the end of the year, the sites look at what training they did and then did it have an impact on the goal that they had. So if they wanted to raise their reading scores in a particular area, did the professional development have that desired outcome and impact on the student assessment data. So we try to tie all that together and use surveys, assessment data, those types of things to measure the effectiveness. And then when we have staff go to trainings outside of SIATech, I mean right now, or the past 2 years, we've been going to a lot of Common Core trainings put on by our district. So we have staff that go out and they attend the district trainings, and then the expectation is they come back and they share that information not only with the people at their sites, but then also through other people that teach their same content area at different schools. And I think one of the important things, and I heard Mary say this in her presentation as well, and what we've moved to is also using the technology that you want the teachers to and other staff to know in your own professional development. So our learning management system that we use is Angel, and a lot of our professional development for our teachers also takes place in Angel. So they're using the same interface that the students are, and they're getting to learn. It's a multi-pronged approach to professional development, and it helps us track that as well.
I'll just add a couple things on evaluating professional development. You know, we do the surveys and the needs assessments, and then we actually tie it into our walkthroughs and then some of our outcome measures, so we can actually see it from the time we give the professional development to what we're seeing in terms of practice. One of the things we learned from last year to this year is we did all this professional development, and then some of our teachers just didn't become these blended teachers that we were expecting, you know, right away. So we saw this real continuum in how long it kind of took. Some teachers were right there day one, others maybe it took a month or two. So one of the things we changed in our blended course is we actually had teachers do as their final piece of evidence a multimedia affirmation piece where they had to actually present this 3-minute multimedia response to the question, who am I as an EAA blended instructor? And so they actually had to take their own vision of what they wanted their classroom to be and their goals and kind of share it that way. And it was extremely powerful. They were very thoughtful, but it really was the missing link I think we didn't have the first year in terms of saying, okay, so now that you have all of this information and knowledge and you know the direction, what are you going to do with that? And it really gives principals a way to go back and say, you know, this was your vision for your classroom. Where are you? You know, how's your thinking evolved over the first several years? So I'm pretty excited about kind of what that's meant in terms of kind of cementing the professional development. I saw the other question on publishers. Pearson was the first that we actually were able to really get at the learning object level. HMH was really good about providing us not only the object level but then the course level. Florida Virtual also were able to use not only virtually but at the object level. Compass, same thing, we're able to allow it to use it as a credit recovery, but it's also at the learning object level. And then Vocabulary and just some other smaller providers have really integrated well, because our whole focus is we've divided the resources inside the platform into those resources that students use to learn, those resources students learn for practice, and then the applied projects. And by our ability to be able to insert not only those published pieces, but also the open source and teacher created, it really allows for students to meet their learning styles as well as tap into their interests as they make selections in terms of how they're creating kind of those pieces of evidence.
So as a way to kind of finish up here, Mary, what if I start with you and then end with Ernie and Liz? If you could wave a magic wand to make things change in a certain way as far as the technology or the teaching or something, what would that be as we look forward to, as we look ahead to blended learning in our schools and that sort of thing? What else needs to change to make it, to remove barriers, to make it more seamless and easy for people to implement blended learning programs in an effective way? So Mary, I'll let you answer that one first, and then we'll end with Ernie and Liz.
Great. I think that was a great, I thought it was going to be a hard question, so I was a little nervous. But anyway, the three that I would jump to is more visual examples, especially at high school. I think for our teachers, being able to see what it looks like has been something that we've started producing a lot of videos, but obviously having a wider library of what it looks like in practice, I think would make it easier. I think in terms of being able to, we're really a believer in not buying one out of the box and then using it. So really we're continuing to work on how do you integrate across different data sources when you're looking at mastery, I think is really, really important. And then in terms of the last piece, I think when you start early on, a lot of the technology tools are more about consumption in terms of consuming information different ways. And in developing our Power of 12 next generation ready competencies. We're really trying to shift to say it's also about 21st century skills, and how do we really make sure that in blending our delivery, we're also giving them the tools that they need moving forward. So those would be the three kind of magic wand things that if we could accelerate transition in those areas, I think it would do great things for blended learning as a whole.
Here's my magic wand. I work in Sacramento, the capital of California. We are where the technological explosion happened. We have a school in the heart of the Silicon Valley, but policymakers remain really nervous about online learning, about blended learning. And what we've found the last couple of years has been a wonderful, wonderful tool is we do a presentation kind of like Mary's, where we show screenshots and we integrate for policymakers, for legislative staff, for the governor's staff, to be able to demonstrate exactly what it is that we're providing to students and what it is that we know about the students, and we're able to monitor throughout the lessons, throughout their time online. And it's amazing how much friendlier or more open policymakers become when they really understand. So as you sit in wherever you are, wherever your district or your school or your state is, just because you understand this stuff at a very advanced level and you're at the cutting edge or the bleeding edge, the people that are making things hard for you, it may not be because they hate you. It may simply be they don't really understand what's going on. And a 30-minute presentation where you're sitting at your desktop, you're sitting at your computer in one city and they're at another city in a computer, and somebody from the school side is somebody else, when they understand both the safeguards and the accountability mechanisms that are built into the systems that we're using, and they see how much learning they're getting, it's really, really powerful. So I encourage everybody, if you haven't given that a shot, if you haven't worked with either through your legislative staff, governor's staff, Department of Education, take the time to help them understand what you're doing and how much you understand about your students, and so they get a sense that there's a lot of accountability built into these systems that'll get us to a point where there's a lot more trust for blended learning. And I think that's a really critical piece. Liz, it's yours.
Thank you, Ernie. Yeah, I agree. And I think that, what we've been talking about is the individual student growth model and how important that is to all students. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand, I would make all education on an individual student growth model where students could have their strengths identified and capitalized on, and then have their weaknesses managed in a way that made them feel successful and grow at a pace that was good for them. If they need additional help, they get it. If they are excelling, they get challenged. And I mean, in the ideal world, that's what our education would look like, and our legislators would recognize it and allow us to do what we need to do to reach every student in the way that they best need to be taught.
Awesome. Thank you. Boy, this was just a tremendous presentation, and the fun part of my job is I get to learn so much about all the great things that are happening in so many of our schools across the United States. And please join me with a applause or happy face for Mary, Ernie, and Liz for them taking their time to put this together for all of us to share what they're doing. So thank you, everybody. As I mentioned earlier, I will send out an email to all of you who registered with all the links and all that sort of thing. If you could take a minute to evaluate this webinar, we'd appreciate it. We hope to see you in the future on other INACOL webinars, which you can find on our website. So thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon wherever you are, and stay warm.